The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was silent. 12 massive chairs sat in a circle, each one holding a being from the most powerful species in known space. Above them, holographic displays showed star maps, trade routes, and military positions across thousands of worlds. Admiral Sarah Chun sat alone in the observer section. She was the only human in the room, maybe the only human within 50 light years. Her dark uniform stood out against the bright alien robes and biosuits around her. She kept her hands folded in her lap and her face calm. The council speaker, a tall being with 4 arms and silver skin, raised one hand for silence. The room grew even quieter. "We have reached our decision," the speaker announced. His voice echoed through the chamber's acoustic system, translated into dozens of languages at once. "After 300 years of observation and patience, we can wait no longer." Sarah felt every alien eye in the room turn toward her. Some were curious. Others showed disgust or fear. A few seemed almost sad. "The human species," the speaker continued, "has proven itself incompatible with galactic civilization. They expand too quickly. They adapt too easily. They refuse to accept their proper place in the natural order." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Vectani representative, a being that looked like a giant mantis, clicked its mandibles in approval. The gas-breathing Helix delegate pulsed its colors in what Sarah knew meant satisfaction. "In the past 50 standard years," the speaker said, "humans have colonized 47 new worlds. They have developed 17 new technologies without consulting this council. They have ignored our guidance on population control, resource management, and territorial expansion." Sarah remembered those colonies. She had visited most of them. Families working hard to build new lives. Children playing in alien soil under foreign suns. Scientists discovering wonders that could benefit every species in the galaxy. Most concerning, the speaker's voice grew harder, is their military development. Humans show no proper respect for the established rules of warfare. They create weapons designed not just to win battles, but to cause maximum damage to their enemies. That was rich, Sarah thought. The Kolvani, sitting 3 seats to her left, had glassed 6 worlds in the last century. The Thalari had turned an entire star system into a slave camp. But humans were the problem because they fought too hard. Therefore, the speaker announced, raising all 4 arms, "The Galactic Council hereby declares the human species to be a threat to galactic stability and peace. Effective immediately, we authorize total military action to eliminate this threat." The vote was called. 12 hands, claws, tentacles, and appendages rose in the air. Unanimous. The human homeworld of Earth, along with all human colonies, will be sterilized within the next standard month, the speaker declared. This action is taken not in anger, but in necessity. The galaxy must be protected from chaos. The chamber erupted in discussions. Military commanders began talking about fleet movements. Diplomats discussed how to spin the announcement to other species. Economic advisors calculated the profits from dividing human territory. Through it all, Sarah sat perfectly still. She thought about her daughter on Earth, probably in school right now. She thought about her brother on New Mars, working his farm. She thought about the millions of humans across the galaxy who were about to learn that their entire species had been sentenced to death. The speaker turned to her. "Admiral Chun, as the human representative, do you have any final words before we begin implementation?" The chamber fell silent again. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. They expected her to beg, to plead for mercy, to offer concessions or bribes or promises of better behavior. They wanted to see humanity grovel. Sarah stood up slowly. She smoothed down her uniform jacket and looked around the room. 12 species that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. 12 civilizations that thought they knew everything about war, politics, and survival. She smiled. Finally, she said, The word hung in the air like a physical thing. The council members looked confused. Some leaned forward in their seats. The speaker's silver face wrinkled with uncertainty. Finally? He repeated. Sarah's smile grew wider. We've been waiting for this for a very long time. The Vectani delegate clicked rapidly, which Sarah knew meant confusion or alarm. The Helix representative's colors shifted to patterns that indicated deep uncertainty. You want war? Asked the council member from the Drachnari, a reptilian species known for their military traditions. Want it? Sarah shook her head. No, we don't want it. But we've been expecting it. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small device. Several council members tensed, but she held it casually, without threat. For 50 years, we've watched you. We've studied your history. We've seen what happens to species that grow too quickly or become too successful. She looked directly at the speaker. You don't just guide the galaxy's development. You control it. And when someone grows beyond your control, she gestured around the room. Well, here we are. The device in her hand began to glow softly. This is a quantum transmitter. Right now, it's sending a signal to every human world, every human ship, every human outpost in the galaxy. The council members were on their feet now. Guards moved toward the observer section, but Sarah held up her other hand. The signal just says 3 words, she continued calmly. The same 3 words I said to you. Her eyes hardened. Finally, the speaker's 4 arms trembled. What have you done? Sarah Chun, Admiral of the Human Space Navy, looked around the chamber one last time. These beings thought they knew humanity. They thought humans were just another young species that could be managed, controlled, and eventually eliminated when convenient. They were about to learn how wrong they were. We've done what we had to do, she said simply. We've prepared for this day since we first realized it would come. The transmitter's glow brightened, sending its message across the galaxy at faster than light speeds. On 1,000 worlds and 1,000 ships, millions of humans were receiving the signal they had all been waiting for. The war had begun, and humanity was ready. 52 years earlier, Dr. James Harrison was supposed to be studying ancient alien ruins on a dead world called Kepler-4 38c. It was routine archaeological work, the kind that most humans found boring, but was necessary for understanding galactic history. James was different. He loved puzzles, especially the kind that previous expedition teams had given up on. The ruins on Kepler-4 38c had been picked over by 12 different species over 3 centuries. Everyone agreed there was nothing important left to find. Everyone was wrong. Deep underground, in a chamber that had been sealed for over 10,000 years, James found something that changed everything. It was a data crystal, perfectly preserved in a stasis field that had somehow kept working all those millennia. The crystal contained the complete records of a species called the Yalani. James had never heard of the Yalani. When he checked the galactic databases, he found almost nothing about them. Just a small note that they had been a minor civilization that went extinct due to resource depletion and civil war about 10,000 years ago. But the crystal told a different story. The Yalani had been brilliant. Their technology was more advanced than anything humans had seen, more sophisticated than even the current council races. They had developed faster than light travel, matter conversion, and genetic enhancement centuries before the current galactic powers. They had also been peaceful. The records showed a species that preferred trade to conquest, diplomacy to war, cooperation to domination. They had been exactly the kind of civilization that should have thrived in galactic society. Instead, they had been systematically destroyed. The crystal contained detailed records of the Yalani's final years. It showed how the early Galactic Council had gradually isolated them, cutting off trade relationships and blocking their expansion. It showed how accidents had destroyed Yalani research stations and how pirates had attacked their colonies with military equipment that somehow looked exactly like Council fleet weapons. Most disturbing of all, it showed that the Yalani had known what was happening. Their final entries described their desperate attempts to hide their remaining population and technology before the final cleansing came. James spent 3 months studying the crystal in secret. What he found made his blood run cold. The Yalani weren't the only ones. References in their data pointed to 17 other species that had been eliminated by the Council over the past 15,000 years. Every single one had been destroyed for the same reason. They had grown too advanced, too quickly, and refused to accept limitations on their development. When James finally returned to Earth, he went straight to Admiral Sarah Chun. She was only a captain then, working in naval intelligence. James had served under her during the border wars and trusted her more than anyone else in the military. Sarah, read his report 3 times before speaking. You're telling me the Galactic Council murders any species that might become a threat to their power? Not murders, James corrected quietly. Prunes. They see themselves as gardeners, keeping the galaxy properly organized. Any species that grows too tall gets cut down. Sarah stared at the data for a long time. How long before they decide we're too tall? Based on the patterns? 50 years. Maybe less. That night, Sarah took the report to Fleet Admiral Rodriguez and Secretary of Defense Williams. Within a week, it had reached the President. Within a month, humanity's most secret project had begun. They called it Project Seedling. The idea was simple. If the Council was going to try to eliminate humanity eventually, humanity needed to be ready. But the preparation had to be completely hidden. The Council couldn't suspect that humans knew about their plans. For 50 years, humanity lived a double life. On the surface, they continued expanding at their normal pace. They built colonies, developed new technologies, and interacted with other species just as they always had. They joined Council committees, followed Council guidelines, and played the role of a young species learning its place in galactic civilization. Underground. They prepared for war. Hidden shipyards were built inside hollow asteroids, disguised as mining operations. Entire worlds were secretly terraformed and then covered with false sensor readings to make them appear barren. Human colonists volunteered to live in hidden underground cities, ready to emerge when the time came. The human military developed new doctrines based on one simple principle. The Council species had been fighting the same way for thousands of years. They followed rules, protocols, and honor codes that made their behavior predictable. Humans would fight differently. Sarah, now Admiral Chun, had spent decades studying every Council species' military history. She knew their tactics, their technologies, and most importantly, their weaknesses. Every Council race was supremely confident in their superiority. They had never faced an enemy that was truly desperate, truly unpredictable, and truly willing to sacrifice everything for victory. The Hidden Fleet grew slowly but steadily. Human engineers reverse-engineered captured alien technology and improved it with human innovations. They built ships that could disguise themselves as cargo haulers or mining vessels, but carried enough firepower to destroy a battleship. They developed weapons that violated every galactic warfare convention, but were perfectly suited for asymmetric conflict. Most importantly, they prepared their people. Every human colony had hidden bunkers and supply caches. Every human ship had sealed orders to be opened if the signal ever came. Every human in the military had trained for this day, even if most of them didn't know why the training was so specific. The hardest part had been waiting. For 50 years, Humans had lived with the knowledge that their peaceful existence was temporary. Parents raised children knowing those children might have to fight for their species' survival. Scientists developed technologies that could be turned into weapons at a moment's notice. Diplomats smiled and negotiated with council members while secretly planning for the day they would become enemies. Admiral Chun remembered her first meeting with the council 25 years ago. She had shaken hands with beings who she knew were planning to exterminate her species. She had smiled and made small talk while calculating how best to destroy them when the time came. That was the burden Project Seedling had placed on humanity's leaders. They had to be friendly while planning for war. They had to appear trusting while preparing for betrayal. They had to act like a young species learning its place while secretly developing the tools to tear down the entire galactic order. Now, standing in the council chambers as the transmitter sent its signal across the galaxy, Admiral Chun felt a strange sense of relief. The waiting was over. The pretending was done. Humanity could finally stop hiding what they were and show the galaxy what 50 years of secret preparation had created. The council members were shouting now, demanding to know what the human signal meant, what humanity had done. Their confusion and panic were exactly what Sarah had expected. They had grown so comfortable in their power, so certain of their control, that they couldn't imagine their prey had been preparing to fight back. They were about to learn that humans were very different from the Yalani, and this time, the pruning would not go as planned. The Council's war fleet was magnificent. 600 ships from 12 different species, representing 15,000 years of military tradition and technological advancement. They moved through space in perfect formation, their weapons charged and their crews confident. Fleet Admiral Korvac of the Draknari commanded the force targeting Earth. He was a veteran of 30 campaigns and had never lost a battle. As his fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. "Begin long-range scans," he ordered his weapons officer. "I want to know the position of every human ship, every defense platform, every military installation." The scans came back almost immediately. Korvac studied the results with growing surprise. "This cannot be correct," he said. "Run the scans again." The results were the same. Earth's orbital defenses were powered down. The human fleet was scattered in small groups throughout the system, not in defensive positions. Most shocking of all, Earth itself was broadcasting a surrender signal. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the human homeworld. They want to negotiate terms of surrender." Korvac had expected many things from this campaign. A desperate last stand, futile attempts at diplomacy, maybe even humans trying to flee into deep space. He had not expected immediate surrender. His tactical officer, a young Draknari named Vesk, looked confused. "Should we accept their surrender, Admiral?" "Absolutely not," Korvac replied firmly. "Our orders are clear. Complete extermination. The humans are trying to buy time, nothing more." But something felt wrong. Korvac had fought dozens of species. He knew what desperation looked like, what false bravado sounded like. This felt different. The human transmission was calm, almost resigned. "Move the fleet into attack position," he ordered. "Begin bombardment of human military installations. Once their defenses are eliminated, we proceed with planetary sterilization." The Council fleet advanced. As they closed the distance to Earth, the human ships fell back without firing a shot. Space seemed eerily quiet. "Admiral," the sensor operator called out suddenly, "I'm detecting massive energy buildup throughout the system." "From where?" "I am not sure. The readings are coming from everywhere." That's when Earth's moon exploded, not the entire moon. Just the side facing away from Earth. The Artificial explosions sent massive chunks of lunar material hurtling through space while revealing what had been hidden beneath. The largest military installation any of the Council species had ever seen. Defensive fire, Korvac shouted, but it was already too late. Weapons platforms that had been disguised as mining equipment opened fire. Asteroid fields that had looked natural revealed themselves as camouflage battleships. Even the space debris floating throughout the system turned out to be armed mines that activated and swarmed toward the Council fleet. But the real surprise came from the human ship's dot as the Council fleet tried to respond to the sudden attack. The scattered human vessels did something no military commander had ever seen. They charged directly toward the enemy ships, not bothering to maintain formation or coordinate their attacks. Some human ships rammed Council vessels at full speed, destroying both ships instantly. Others flew suicidal attack runs, using their own ships as guided missiles. "They're insane," Vesk shouted as a human cruiser smashed into a Council battleship, triggering a chain reaction that destroyed 3 more ships. Korvac watched in horror as his carefully organized fleet dissolved into chaos. The humans weren't following any recognized rules of space combat. They acted like every ship was expendable, every crew member willing to die if it meant taking enemies with them. "Pull back," he ordered. "Reform at safe distance." But there was no safe distance. As the Council ships retreated, they discovered that the empty space around Earth was filled with hidden weapons. Cloaked platforms revealed themselves and opened fire. Apparently abandoned space stations came to life with massive guns. Even civilian cargo ships turned out to be disguised warships. The attack that was supposed to be a quick extermination had become a nightmare. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. The simultaneous strikes on human colonies met with the same impossible resistance. Worlds that appeared defenseless turned into death traps. Ships that looked like merchant vessels revealed massive weapon arrays. Human civilians who should have been helpless turned out to have been secretly trained for guerrilla warfare. On New Mars, the Vectani attack fleet found the colony apparently abandoned. When they landed troops to investigate, the empty settlement exploded around them. Human colonists emerged from underground bunkers with weapons designed specifically to fight Vectani soldiers. The insectoid warriors, who had terrorized a dozen species, found themselves hunted through underground tunnels by humans, who seemed to appear from nowhere. At the research station on Kepler Prime, Helix gas breathers discovered that humans had somehow weaponized the atmosphere itself. The air turned toxic to their species, but harmless to humans, forcing the attackers to retreat while human defenders harassed them with hit-and-run attacks. The worst shock came at the Proxima Centauri shipyards. The Council attack force expected to find civilian construction facilities. Instead, they found the largest military fleet any species had ever assembled. Hundreds of ships that had been disguised as cargo haulers shed their false hulls to reveal advanced warships. The shipyards themselves transformed into massive weapon platforms. But it wasn't just the hidden fleets and secret weapons that horrified the Council forces. It was the way humans fought. Council species had spent millennia developing honorable rules of war. Battles were fought at long range. Commanders avoided unnecessary casualties. Surrender was accepted when resistance became hopeless. War was a political tool, not a fight to the death. Humans ignored every rule. They used captured Council weapons in ways their designers never intended. They modified alien technology during battle, turning defensive systems into offensive weapons. Most disturbing of all, they seemed genuinely willing to die for victory. A Kavani admiral watched in shock as a damaged human ship, its crew dead or dying, continued attacking on autopilot until it finally exploded. A Thalari commander received surrender demands from humans who were clearly outnumbered 10 to 1 and had no logical chance of survival. They fight like cornered animals, one report stated. No, another commander corrected. Animals know when to give up. These humans fight like they believe death is better than defeat. Within 6 hours of the extermination beginning, the Council forces were in full retreat from half their targets. Emergency signals flooded the communication networks as fleet commanders reported impossible casualties and requested immediate reinforcements. Admiral Korvac, his proud fleet reduced to less than 200 ships, broadcast an emergency report to the Council. The humans were ready for us, he said, his voice shaking. This wasn't a young species caught off guard. They knew we were coming. They've been preparing for this war longer than we've been planning it. He paused, watching through his view screen as another disabled human ship suddenly came to life and destroyed 2 of his escorts before finally dying. Request immediate strategic reassessment. The enemy we face is not the one we expected. Repeat. The humans are not what we thought they were. The message was received at Council headquarters 3 hours later. By that time, 12 more easy targets had turned into costly disasters. And the greatest military alliance in Galactic history was beginning to understand that they had made a terrible mistake. The humans hadn't just been hiding their strength. They have been waiting for this moment, preparing for this war, and planning for this exact scenario. The Council had wanted to eliminate humanity before they became dangerous. They were 50 years too late. 3 weeks into the war, the Galactic Council held an emergency session. The Grand Chamber that had once echoed with confident declarations of human extermination now buzzed with nervous whispers and barely contained panic. We need to discuss the situation, the speaker announced, his forearms trembling slightly. The initial strikes did not proceed as planned. That was the understatement of the millennium. Of the 60 major human targets, only 12 had been successfully destroyed. The other 48 had turned into disasters that cost the Council forces over half their initial fleet strength. The humans fight like madmen, declared General Lex of the Corvani military caste. His scaled face showed deep scarring from a human boarding action that had somehow penetrated his flagship's defenses. They use weapons in ways that make no tactical sense, but somehow work. Admiral Zeril of the Vectani clicked her mandibles in agreement. My forces encountered human ships that had been modified during combat. They took our own captured weapons and changed them while under fire. Who does such things? The answer was sitting in the report spread across their tables. Humans did such things. Humans took a Drachnary plasma cannon designed for ship-to-ship combat and somehow turned it into a boarding weapon. Humans captured Thalari shield generators and modified them into offensive systems that could overload enemy ships' power grids. Most disturbing of all, humans seemed to learn from every encounter. Tactics that worked against them once never worked again. They adapted their strategies not over months or years, but during individual battles. There's something else, added Commander Voss of the Helix delegation. Her gas-filled suit pulsed with colors that indicated deep concern. Our intelligence reports suggest they're using psychological warfare. The other council members looked confused. Psychological warfare was considered primitive, something used by lesser species who couldn't compete on technical grounds. They broadcast recordings of our battles across all frequencies, Voss continued. But they edit them to show only our losses, our retreats, our ships being destroyed. Our own forces are seeing these broadcasts. So what? General Dex growled. Proper soldiers don't concern themselves with enemy propaganda. Our soldiers are starting to ask questions, Voss replied quietly. They want to know why we're losing ships to a species we told them was inferior. Some are requesting transfers to sectors away from human space. The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken by an aide rushing into the chamber. Emergency report from the Tau Ceti sector. The aide announced breathlessly. Admiral Chun's fleet has broken through our lines. They're heading directly for our supply base at Kepler Station. The council members erupted in alarmed chatter. Kepler Station was supposed to be impossible to reach. It was located deep in council space, protected by 3 defensive fleets and orbital fortifications that had never been breached in 5 centuries. How many ships does Chun have? The speaker demanded. Intelligence estimates 50 vessels, mostly converted civilian craft and captured council ships. General Vex laughed bitterly. 50 ships against Kepler's defenses? The humans have finally overextended themselves. But 12 hours later, another aide burst into the emergency session with news that silenced the chamber. Kepler Station has fallen. The holographic display showed the aftermath. The massive orbital facility that had served as a major council supply depot was now burning wreckage floating in space. Around it, the remains of 3 defensive fleets drifted like metallic snow. How? The speaker whispered that the aide activated a recording from one of the few surviving council ships. The image showed Admiral Sarah Chun's flagship, a captured Draknari battleship that had been modified with human technology. It was leading a charge directly into the station's defensive grid, but it wasn't a normal attack. The human ships moved in ways that violated every principle of space combat. They used their own damaged vessels as shields for undamaged ones. They turned ships that were too badly hurt to fight into guided missiles. Some human crews actually evacuated their ships and allowed them to be piloted by volunteers on suicide runs. The recording showed council defenders trying to respond to tactics they had never seen before. How do you plan a defense against enemies who treat their own ships as disposable weapons? How do you predict the movements of forces that ignore their own casualties? Look at this, the aide said, highlighting a section of the battle. A human cruiser had been cut in half by council weapons. Instead of retreating or abandoning ship, the crew had somehow kept the forward section fighting while using the engine section as a bomb. They turned a crippled ship into 2 weapons. Admiral Zerrell observed with something approaching awe. I've never seen anything like it. But the most disturbing part came at the end of the recording. As Kepler Station fell, Admiral Chun's ship broadcast a message on all frequencies. It wasn't a demand for surrender or a military ultimatum. It was much simpler and somehow more frightening. This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Human Space Navy. To any council forces receiving this message, we know where you are. We know how you think. We know how you fight. And we're coming. The message was followed by something even worse. Data packets containing detailed information about council military procedures, ship designs, and tactical doctrines. Information that should have been impossible for humans to obtain. They've been studying us, Commander Vos said quietly. For decades. They've been analyzing our methods, our weaknesses, our military culture. While we've been ignoring them, General Vex added bitterly. The truth was becoming clear to everyone in the chamber. The council had spent centuries fighting species that were like them, organized, hierarchical, bound by rules and traditions. They had never faced enemies who fought with creativity, desperation, and complete disregard for conventional military wisdom. Worse, humans seemed capable of inspiring their forces in ways council species had never seen. Reports came in of human ships with catastrophic damage continuing to fight effectively. Human crews performed repairs under fire that should have been impossible. Human commanders led from the front, sharing the same risks as their soldiers. There's another problem, the aide continued reluctantly. The Corvan delegation has requested a private meeting to discuss reassessing the campaign objectives. The chamber fell silent. The Corvani were one of the council's most militant members. If they were having doubts about the war, what about the Rigel colonies? The speaker asked desperately. Our intelligence said they were lightly defended. Admiral Chun hit them yesterday, the aide replied. She somehow got there 6 hours before our attack fleet arrived. The humans were waiting in ambush. The recording of that battle was even worse than Kepler Station. Chun had anticipated the Council's strategy and positioned her forces perfectly. The ambush hadn't just destroyed the attacking fleet. It had been recorded and broadcast to every species in the galaxy. She's making us look incompetent, General Lex snarled. No, Commander Vos corrected. She's proving that we are incompetent. Against them, anyway. The awful truth was sinking in. For 15,000 years, the Council had maintained order by being stronger, more advanced and more organized than any potential threat. They had eliminated species that might challenge them before those species became dangerous. But humans had become dangerous while appearing harmless. They had prepared for war while seeming peaceful. Most importantly, they fought in ways that turned the Council's advantages into weaknesses. What do we do? The speaker asked thought it was a question none of them could answer. They could continue the war, but the casualties were mounting while human forces seemed to grow stronger with each battle. They could try and negotiate, but Admiral Chun's broadcast suggested humans weren't interested in anything less than total victory. For the first time in millennia, the Galactic Council faced an enemy they couldn't understand, couldn't predict, and couldn't defeat using conventional methods, and that enemy was led by a woman who had been planning for this war since before most. Council members had been born. The session ended with no decisions made and no solutions found. As the Council members dispersed to their private quarters, each carried the same terrible knowledge. They had awakened something they couldn't control. Humanity was no longer the problem. Humanity was becoming the solution to the Council's existence, and Admiral Sarah Chun was just getting started. Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of her flagship as it emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Drachnori home system. Before her stretched the heart of the Galactic Council's power, 12 core worlds that had ruled the galaxy for 15,000 years. Status report, she ordered. 700 ships in our fleet, Admiral, replied Commander Torres, her tactical officer. We've received confirmation from the other human task forces. They're in position around the remaining Council core systems. Sarah nodded. 4 months of war had led to this moment. The Council's military forces were scattered, demoralized, and fighting a war they didn't understand against an enemy they had underestimated. But the core worlds remained, protected by the most advanced defenses in known space. Admiral, called her communications officer, we're receiving a transmission from the Council Emergency Assembly. Put it through. The view screen showed the speaker of the Galactic Council, though he looked very different from the confident being who had declared humanity's extermination. His silver skin had dulled, and his forearms shook with exhaustion or fear. Admiral Chun, the speaker said, we request immediate negotiations to end this conflict. Sarah studied him for a moment. Behind the speaker, she could see other council members. Some looked angry. Others seemed defeated. All of them looked terrified. What terms are you offering? She asked. Complete withdrawal of council forces from human space. Recognition of human sovereignty over all current colonies. Reparations for damages caused by our mistake. Your mistake? Sarah repeated. Is that what you're calling it? The speaker hesitated. The council acted too hastily. We misunderstood human intentions. We're prepared to acknowledge our error and return to peaceful coexistence. Sarah almost smiled. Even now, facing the collapse of their empire, the council couldn't admit the truth about what they were. They wanted to pretend this had all been a misunderstanding, a diplomatic error that could be corrected with the right agreement. I'm afraid that's not acceptable, she said. The speaker's image flickered with surprise. But you've won. Your forces control 37 systems. Our military effectiveness has been reduced by 70%. What more do you want? The truth, Sarah replied simply. She turned to Commander Torres. Begin the final approach. Signal all task forces to move to attack positions. Admiral Chun. The speaker called desperately. You cannot attack the core worlds. The orbital defenses alone will destroy your fleet. We'll see, Sarah said, and cut the transmission. As the human fleet advanced, the Council's defenses came to life. Massive orbital platforms armed with weapons that could destroy planets opened fire. Shield generators that had protected these worlds since the fall of the last galactic empire activated. Fighter squadrons launched from bases that had never been threatened in 5 millennia. It should have been humanity's final defeat. No force in galactic history had ever broken through the core world defenses, but Admiral Chun had spent 50 years studying the Council, and she knew something they had forgotten about themselves. Their greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. They had become too comfortable with their own power. Activate the beacon, she ordered. Deep in the human fleet, a single ship that looked like an ordinary research vessel powered up a device unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was the product of decades of work by humanity's best scientists, built using technology from a dozen different species and enhanced with innovations that could only have come from human ingenuity. The weapon wasn't designed to destroy ships or break shields. It was designed to destroy something much more powerful: lies. When the beacon activated, every communication system in the Draknari system began broadcasting the truth. Not human propaganda or enemy claims, but absolute, undeniable truth drawn directly from the Council's own archives. The records of the Yelani genocide, the destruction of 17 other species, the systematic elimination of any civilization that might challenge Council supremacy. 5,000 years of mass murder disguised as galactic peacekeeping. But the beacon didn't stop with the Council's crimes. It revealed everything: how the current war had started, how humanity had prepared, how the Council had planned to exterminate an entire species for the crime of being too successful. The effect was immediate and devastating. On the orbital defense platforms, crews who had been told they were fighting to protect galactic civilization suddenly learned they were defending mass murderers. Entire squadrons of fighters refused orders. Shield operators abandoned their posts. The magnificent defenses that had protected the core worlds began shutting down from within. Admiral, Commander Torres reported, "We're receiving surrender signals from 40% of the defensive installations." But the beacon's effect went far beyond the Draknari system. The signal was being rebroadcast across the galaxy by hidden human transmitters. Every species that had ever been threatened by the Council, every world that had been forced to accept limitations on their development, every civilization that had wondered why the galaxy never seemed to advance beyond Council control, was suddenly learning the truth. The revolt began within hours. Species that had been members of the Council for centuries turned on their former allies. Worlds that had provided troops for the war against humanity declared independence. The carefully maintained balance of power that had kept the Council in control for millennia collapsed in a matter of days. 3 weeks later, Admiral Sarah Chun stood in the ruins of the Council chamber where this all began. The Great Hall was empty now, except for 3 surviving Council members who had requested a final meeting. The speaker was among them, though he seemed to have aged years in the past month. "You've destroyed everything," he said quietly. 15,000 years of galactic civilization gone. No, Sarah corrected. 15,000 years of galactic oppression ended. She gestured to the empty chamber. This place was never about civilization. It was about control. You eliminated any species that might challenge your authority and told yourselves it was for the greater good. We maintained order, protested one of the other survivors, a Vectani delegate whose once proud chitin was now cracked and dull. Without the Council, the galaxy will fall into chaos. Maybe, Sarah agreed, but it will be honest chaos. Species will rise and fall based on their own choices, not because you decided they were growing too quickly. The speaker looked up at her with something approaching desperation. What happens now? To us? To the galaxy? Sarah considered the question. That depends on what you do next. You can try to rebuild the Council, maintain your power, and keep fighting this war. Or you can step aside and let the galaxy decide its own future. And if we choose the latter, then you live. Your species survive. You become just another civilization among many, instead of the masters of all. The speaker was quiet for a long time. Finally, he asked the question that had been haunting him since the war began. In the council chamber, when we declared war on humanity, you said, "Finally." Why? Sarah smiled, but it was not a happy expression, because we knew this day would come eventually. The Council couldn't tolerate humanity's growth forever. You would either eliminate us or try to control us completely. We preferred to face that challenge on our own terms when we were ready, rather than wait for you to choose the moment. You wanted this war? We prepared for this war, Sarah corrected. There's a difference. We didn't want to fight. We didn't want to see millions die. We didn't want to tear down the Galactic Order. She paused. But we knew someone had to. She gestured around the empty chamber. The Yolani couldn't do it. Neither could the other 17 species you eliminated. They were too peaceful, too. Trusting, too willing to believe you would let them live if they just stayed quiet and didn't cause trouble. But humans are different. Humans learned from their mistakes. When we found the records of what happened to the others, we decided we wouldn't be victims. We would either live free or die fighting, but we would never accept extermination quietly. The speaker's forearms drooped in defeat. So this was always inevitable. Yes, Sarah said simply. From the moment you decided that genocide was an acceptable tool for maintaining order, this became inevitable. Maybe not with humanity, but with someone, eventually. She turned to leave, then paused. The galaxy is about to change in ways none of us can predict. New alliances will form. New conflicts will arise. New species will discover what they're truly capable of when they're not living under your restrictions. It will be chaotic, the speaker said. It will be free, Sarah replied. 6 months later, Admiral Sarah Chung stood in her office on New Geneva, watching through her window as representatives from 47 different species worked together to establish new trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. The old Galactic Council was gone, replaced by a loose confederation of free worlds that made decisions through cooperation rather than domination. It wasn't perfect. There were disputes, conflicts, and challenges that the old council had suppressed through force. But there was also innovation, growth, and hope that had been impossible under the previous system. Her aide knocked on the door. "Admiral, the Kepler Commission is ready for your testimony." Sarah nodded,